How's it going, fam? Welcome back to Eric's EDC, and today we are going to talk about different levels of sharpness, and we're also going to look at something that came in yesterday that I'm really excited to show you guys. This is another test subject that we are going to be running when we do our massive fixed blade testing. It's going to take months to get through, and I'm really excited to do that. We're waiting on a couple more pieces to come in, and I'm figuring probably by April, we'll have everything ready to do the test, and it will honestly run the rest of the year. It's going to be so extensive. So let's look at this. This is a beauty, and I'm very excited about it because it's an M390 blade steel, and I have zero experience with Bowler M390. So this is a really gorgeous knife. It's a bird and trout style EDC knife, and it is called the Flit, which I will say, when I found out the name, my mind went to other places and I couldn't help but giggle. However, we're going to try to be serious. It is called the Flit, and it's named after a hummingbird, a type of hummingbird. And this is made by Dusty over at Duckhead Forge, LLC. And this is a beautiful piece that he made for me, and I am going to test it and review it. It will also be part of the massive steel testing that we're doing, but this is a gorgeous forged knife that he made, and he gave me full freedom to critique it, compliment it, just talk about it. Honestly, he's very new into the knife making world. He works at Pop's Knife Supply, and he also knows Steve Kalari from Kalari Custom Knives very well. I believe Steve has been helping him learn how to sharpen and all of that good stuff. But I wanted to, wow, I just had a really big stutter right there. I wanted to give my first impressions of the knife today. I've always had a stutter, man. Does anyone else have one? Like, over the years, I've kind of grown out of it a little bit. It used to be way worse, and it was more anxiety driven than anything, but holy crap, sometimes my tongue is just like, and I just stutter like crazy. Anyway, first impressions, this is gorgeous. So this has beautiful fit and finish. These are camo micarta scales with orange G10 pins. And then we have a kind of Halloween theme there, like Wednesday. Black and orange liners. Forge finish, obviously. Just a gorgeous piece. It's very long and thin, which I like. I really enjoy the kind of gentleman style knives, the slim, sleek ones. Really comfortable in hand, beautiful handle. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's check the edge that it came with. Now, I already reached out to Dusty about this. I was a little curious about the edge because it kind of looks like a hybrid. I can see that there is a bevel, however, it's convexed. It's very blended, if that makes any sense. So I couldn't really tell if he meant to make it like a zero grind convex or if there was supposed to be an edge bevel. And he kind of just said, like, he's working on his sharpening. It's convexed, and he's just learning and growing and figuring out how to, make edges the best he can. So you can kind of see we have the main bevel here, and then you can see what's, I guess, supposed to be the actual cutting edge bevel, but it's so blended that it's not like a refined edge bevel like you see on a normal knife. Like if we take this, see how we have the flat and then the literal actual edge bevel, and they're very different. It's hard to decipher the edge bevel on this one, but it's there. So I think it's something he's working on. I will say it's sharp. Like, that's extremely sharp. I'm very curious to see how this edge holds up because it's kind of a hybrid. And once I do dull it, I will be putting an actual refined edge bevel on just to see how it works, but I'm really curious to run this kind of convex blend. But this is gorgeous. Like, for someone just starting, how the heck he pulls all this off, I don't know. Absolutely stunning. And I really like that he wanted honest feedback, you know, like, to make the best product he can. So the only thing initially that I can say is I would like to see kind of a solid decision on the edge. Like, if you're going to do a zero convex or if you're going to do an edge bevel. But the blended thing is just, like, I initially was like, I wonder how I'm going to work with that. But I will put an edge bevel on when necessary. Really excited about this. He told me that the HRC is 61.5 to 62. Really like that for M390. Just a gorgeous piece that I'm really excited to test. And he sent this beautiful black leather sheath with it. So check out Duckhead Forge on Instagram. Incredible guy. Like I said, he's learning and growing. I'm sure he's the type of guy where maybe you could throw ideas at him or questions, comments, whatever, and he will take them. Absolutely incredible to work with so far. Thank you again, Dusty, for sending that in. Now, let's kind of continue a conversation that I initiated yesterday in my video, which is different levels of sharpness and different types of edges, I guess. It's something that I've talked about throughout my whole journey on my channel, and I don't think I've gone in depth about it, but there are different, you know, grits, obviously, that you can sharpen knives at, and what they do, depending on the steel, the composition of the steel, they will produce different types of edges. So, for instance, you can take a 600 grit DMT diamond stone and sharpen 80 CRV2 on it, and then you can take that same exact DMT diamond stone and you can sharpen CPM Crewware on it. And obviously this is very dependent on HRC, heat treat, geometry. I know, but I can't say that every single time we talk about knives. Like, that's just logic, right? It obviously depends. But in general, if you have different steels that have really different compositions and stuff, even though you're sharpening on the same exact stone, you can get different types of edges. And that's something I want to kind of show you some examples of today. Basically, we're going to talk about toothy and refined 600 grit working edges. We're going to talk about what I call glassed out edges, which are semi-polished edges on steels that are I guess they have a fine grain structure and they will be sharp, but they're smooth and glassy. Okay, we kind of talked about that yesterday. We're going to talk about polished edges, bitey ones, and not so bitey ones. And lastly, we're going to talk about high polished, ultra fine edges like this. So these are all edges that I have done myself. I will give a quick disclaimer. A couple of these knives I have used and I haven't touched up before this video because this is a really like impromptu video based off of yesterday's discussion. I don't know, but there may be like a hang up or two on some of these knives, but let's focus on the cutting performance of the type of, you know, finish on the edge. Because some of these have been used and they might not be perfect, okay? So I'm gonna stand up, that way I'm not fighting to like see if I'm in frame or not. It just makes it way easier when I can kind of stand above and show you guys. So we have normal printer paper here. We'll use the same paper for the entire test, and I'm just gonna show you some different types of edges. So 80 CRV2 right here. This is a mini spade Gen 2 from John at BGM Knives. 600 grit DMT. This is going to be a toothy working edge. So you can see it's very sharp. And I want to know if you can hear the difference between that paper cut and the one I'm going to do next. So this is a Crewware mini spade from John at BGM Knives Gen 3. It's a little bit different from the Gen 2. It has a little more height to the blade. They're both double hollow ground as well. But let's check out CPM Crew Wear at 600 diamond finish. Did you hear the difference? It's a little more quiet. This one going through the paper is a little more quiet than the EDC RV2. And that's because the CPM Crew Wear is a more kind of refined grain structure steel as opposed to this toothy EDC RV2. So they're finished at the same exact grit on the same exact stone, and they're the same exact knife, but they're going to have two different cutting performances given the composition of the steel. Next, let's take a look at a Chris Reeves Small Sebenza 31 in S45 VN blade steel. This is a semi-polished blade, and this is what I like to call a glassed out blade. For me, these generally are much better at kitchen tasks. Cutting produce, I feel like they glide through produce really well, and if you're doing cooking tasks with these knives, I feel like they do great. You know, the toothier you get, the easier the knife is going to grab material and pull through it. So it really depends on what you do with your knives. I love a 600 grit toothy working edge for my EDC knives, but that's because I do a lot of tasks that I need that bite and grit for. Not everyone needs that, so sometimes choosing a steel that likes to kind of glass out, like S45 VN or 154 CM, it might work better for you. And some people also just really like, you know, semi-polishing edges, right? Let's check out how this one cuts through paper, and let's listen to the difference. So this one's kind of in the middle. We've got one hang up there from use, which I figured that would happen on at least one of these. But it's pretty quiet. One of the biggest telltale signs that this is glassed out is that I can run my fingers on it without, you know, anything happening. So it does go through paper, other than that one little hang up there. It is sharp, but it's glassed out. So this is obviously my least favorite type of edge. It doesn't work super well for me. The only way I would use an edge like that is in the kitchen, because I've found that it cuts very well. It just like sails through food because you don't have that resistance of like the exposed carbides, I guess. Really like that for kitchen use, but not really my jam otherwise. Now let's look at a toothy polished edge. This is a Benchmade bug out in S30V blade steel, and S30V is notorious for being a toothy type of steel. It has a great working edge, very grabby in my opinion. I actually really enjoy S30V. Let's listen to the difference. So this is going to be our bitey, polished edge. It's quiet, but you can kind of hear that high-pitched twang, almost like that, zoof, like it. I wonder if you can hear it in the speaker. You tap your fingers on it, and the skin on your fingers like grabs. Okay, so although it is a, you know, polished edge, I mean, look at that. It's a working polished edge. This is one of the best edges, in my opinion, that you can use for EDC. It obviously takes way more time to produce than a working edge that's at a 600 grit that is not polished. However, I have found from my experience that these polished working toothy edges last forever. And depending on the steel, the initial front end sharpness may not last as long. It really depends. Like, I think 15V, I've heard, has really good front end sharpness for a while at a high polish, but it totally depends on what steel you're using. I think MagnaCut is one of those ones where like the front end sharpness kind of dies down a little quick, and then you have a really good working edge for a significant period of time if you polish it. So again, just pick and choose what you want your edge to do for you. But this is a really bitey, toothy, polished edge. I did lay that bevel back on my stones. Obviously, that's a much thicker bevel than a typical bug out. But I like reprofiling my edges on my stones. I feel like it just enhances the performance. Let's look at a polished, not bitey edge. So this is a Chris Reeve Small Sebenza 31 in MagnaCut. This one's a little dirty, but you can see I'm trying to pick it up. I don't know why the camera's not focusing. You can see it's polished, it's reflecting. There we go. Okay. So polished edge. But this one is not super bitey because, again, depending on the steel and the geometry and everything, the high polish that you bring it to can really decipher what type of carbides are going to be exposed and to what extent. So on the S30V, it's bitey as crap. Let's see the MagnaCut. So this one actually needs to be sharpened, I can tell. So it's going through and it's like sharp, but it's not obviously that bug out level because it needs to be worked on. But this is kind of like the glassed out S45, right? We've got a polish, and again, I can do that thing from before where this isn't going to do anything to me. It's not a bitey polish. Now, I will say this would cut through paper much better if it had been touched up before the video. I just didn't have time to do it. So it's going to sound a little louder than it typically does. But generally, when you polish this one up, when I polish this one up, it sails through, and it's just not nearly as bitey, but it is sharp. I hope that makes sense. Lastly, let's look at an ultra high polish edge. Man, it's so polished I can't even get it. There we go. So on this one, on this Case Sodbuster Jr. in carbon steel, you can almost see that the finish on the edge is nearly identical to the finish on the flats. It is such a high polish that it's actually nearly the same. Completely reflective. This is like the ultimate refined edge. Let's hear and see how this one goes through paper. So this one is quiet. I feel that it's subdued, and it's such a high polish that it is, extremely sharp, but there's almost no resistance going through the paper, which makes it very quiet. Okay? So this is a knife that I reprofiled, and I obviously sharpened it, or I polished it to the highest polish I could bring it to, which was a 16,000 grit shaft and glass stone, and then I worked through some strops, a progression that led to a finishing product of 0.5 micron. Very high polish, especially on a carbon steel. And again, depending on what steel you choose, this ultra polished edge will really determine what your cutting experience is going to be. This carbon steel, this 1095 from Case, is a very toothy steel in nature. So even if you polish it, it's still going to be really bitey and really sharp because it's a carbon steel, right? So you can take this knife, bring it to a completely reflective finish, and it's just going to be incredibly sharp. Like, just beautiful. And fairly quiet because, again, you have that minimal resistance going through the paper and material because that is so polished. It just sails right through. Okay? Absolutely gorgeous. So in conclusion, for me, I kind of look at my knife as a whole and as an individual because it's not a one-size-fits-all. It really depends on the geometry, the blade steel, the composition, and the sharpening progression that you're using, and you can really decipher what path you want to take for your cutting performance. And it's totally up to the user, and you can, you know, play around with all of these options, and they all do well in very certain, you know, situations. I know a lot of people that love running ultra polished edges, and they love putting that time and effort into doing that because they're beautiful, but they also just give you a crazy clean cutting performance when you're using them. And then there are other people that really like that basic 600 grit working toothy edge because they want that grit and that bite to get through cardboard, rope, zip ties, packaging, and these just completely annihilate everything in their path. But I just kind of wanted to show you that and talk a little bit about the differences because it's something that I'm super passionate about. I love sharpening knives and I love playing around with different finishes on different steels because if you think about it, the composition of the steel is totally going to tell you what it will enjoy the most sharpening wise to get its highest performance, depending on, you know, the chromium and the vanadium and the carbides and the grain structure and all of that stuff. Like, if you get into the science of it, it's so cool to kind of pick it apart and put it on a canvas and be like, okay, what would work? What sharpening progression would bring the best qualities and characteristics out of this steel for the user? That's why I do not agree, you know, that a knife review can be done if you have not sharpened the knife. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're going to give a review on a knife, if you don't even know how it works, how can you review it? You know what I'm saying? Because the knife is meant to cut. That's why I do the 30 days of testing before I do the review on my knife, because I need to sharpen it a couple of times before I give a review. That way I can be like, okay, the knife is advertised to do best with a 600 grit working edge. We tried toothy, polished in between, and yes, the composition was correct and it did do the best with the 600 grit working edge. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the information I want to give you guys at the end of a review, as opposed to just being like, this knife cut an Amazon package and it didn't roll, so therefore I'm going to tell you to spend your money on it. You know? I hope that makes sense. I hope that you enjoyed that video. This is a huge passion of mine. I am continuing to learn and grow with sharpening. I'm taking it to a whole new level lately. Like, I'm really excited about some of the products that I've had come in to sharpen with, and this Crewwear knife, I just did this like 2 hours ago, and I'm just so ecstatic about how it turned out. Like, that's a prime example of what Crewwear likes to do, is this kind of in-between refined working edge, and it just lasts forever and has great edge stability. So it's really cool to see those characteristics come out of the woodwork during sharpening, and I'm going to keep making content on it. With that being said, go use your shit. Learn how to sharpen your knives. And I will see you on the next video, fam. I love you so, so much. Take care.